Can I welcome everybody on behalf of Thrombosis UK for joining our very first webinar in a series of a week of webinars that we're about to launch in our support and celebration for World Thrombosis Day, which is of course on this coming Tuesday, the 13th of October. I think it's really important that we have started the week with a webinar that focuses on patients and on the patient journey. We're incredibly grateful to Shaun for making this possible and for being willing to come along and talk through his experiences over the last 10 years. And I think it's really vital and key that it's the patient experience and the patient journey that is centre to all of this week's work, so that we can help improve prevention, but also experience and outcome. So without further ado, I will pass over to Shaun and let him begin. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Jo. I'll start with a slide. I don't know about anybody else, but I think it's absolutely tremendous the work that the Thrombosis UK team have done to get these patient webinars as part of an extensive programme of webinars also for our healthcare professionals. So thanks, Jo and the team, and thanks for the invite today. First of all, I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Shaun Kinghorn. As you can probably gather from the accent, if you've got a good broadband connection, that I happen from the northeast of England. And Jo and I were just told a little bit earlier, it's a bit warmer down south than it is up north. But I love living up in the Tyneside area, and it's a great area to live in. I live with my wife, Melanie. She was previously an accident emergency nurse. We have 5 children who are grown up, so we have the house to ourselves at the moment. And in 2010, I was admitted to A&E following unprovoked bilateral pulmonary embolism. It was perceived, I described them as being severe. And I guess the focus of my presentation this morning is literally from that time when I was diagnosed with pulmonary embolism to talk about that recovery journey. What were the high points? What were the low points? What were the things I struggled with? What sort of help made a real difference? So these are some of the things that I'll be touching on as I go forward. And I'd like to, I guess, as a context to this, recognise that each of our recovery journeys are very different. I've got this picture from the Fells here, and it speaks to me in a different way, in the sense that there are some who will reach the summit very quickly, and therefore their recovery from pulmonary embolism will be relatively swift. Okay, there are some that will, I guess, hobble along, and it might take them a long, long time to reach that level of recovery that they're happy with. Perhaps some recovery journeys may be punctuated where they reclot. So in terms of each of our recovery journeys are very different. And one of the things I'd like to emphasize is that my recovery journey might not be exactly the same as yours, but perhaps there are some of the things that I touch on, or that some of the points that you raise in the comments section or the questions that are posed might give us some hope. It also might give us some direction in terms of the type of resources that may be helpful. But for me, one of the take-home messages in terms of a successful recovery, if there is such a thing, it seems to come when we have a good working partnership with those who care for us, seeking the right information at the right time and posing the right questions at the right time to the right people. So here we go. Let's work through this journey, as it were. What I'd like to cover is, I guess, 3 main areas. And the first area is the run-up to diagnosis and the process of managing various symptoms, and also looking at the psychological side. What was happening inside? What were my fears and concerns? And also what helped deal with the psychological side of things. And we'll take a little bit of a break just to have a few questions that have been submitted or questions that come through from the discussion board. Then the second half, after half time, is talking about a mismatch of issues, talking about what was it like for my wife and family? And I really posed a question, just tell us exactly what was it like for you. And I didn't make any comment at all. And I've got a slide and some comments from my wife and family, how they view the situation. Secondly, how can we make the most of consultations with healthcare staff? Because I think recovering is made so much easier when we can bring the best out of the staff. And do we have a role? And if we do, how do we actually make the most of those consultations? And then finally, I'm going to just touch on briefly anticoagulation, the bumps in the road, because it's all well and done recovering for a pulmonary embolism or DVT, but the anticoagulation journey goes on for many, and therein lies a whole, I guess, series of issues. And then finally, just touch on my experience of VTE recovery and well-being within the world of COVID-19. And many of you will be more experienced than me in actually trying to traverse this difficult time. And then finally, I just reflect on some of the lessons that I've learned thus far. And then we'll have, I guess, a more extensive period of questions and comments. So that's what I guess this session will look like. Okay then, in terms of background, I was previously very healthy and well. I've got a history of marathon run. I've got a history of cycling up to 150 to 200 miles a week prior to the pulmonary embolism. I was a keen swimmer, and one of my biggest regrets was not doing a triathlon. I never got the three together, as it were. And in 2009, my wife and I went across the United States to visit friends and do some sightseeing in the Midwest in some of the areas where there was skiing resorts, etc. So I had a long haul flight and I had a great time. The holiday was superb, but I noticed when I was out there, I couldn't run very well. And I was fairly fit at the time, just very breathless. So when I came home, I went to see my GP and he says, you've been on a long haul flight, you've picked up a virus, let's see how it goes. And it improved with no treatment. And how I discovered that I was more breathless was simply when I used to run to work in the morning. There's a hill I go up and I could run no problem, but this breathlessness was there when I was running the hill and I had to stop and walk up the rest of the hill. But things went on a little bit. I was preparing to do a charity swim for a cancer charity. And what happened was I went to the pool one morning at 7:30 in the morning to do my usual mile. And I couldn't swim a length. I got the end of the length and I held on to the side and I was breathless. And I thought, this is not right. I also had a lot of fatigue, but I thought, is this due to being busy at work? So there was some very subtle symptoms. I immediately went to see my GP after that swimming experience. He did a chest x-ray, which found that there was some changes in the base of my left lung. And my ECG was normal. And so he referred us to a chest specialist. He didn't know what was going on. So I never ever got to see that chest specialist at all. Within a month, I was working at home, had phone meetings lined up, and suddenly, it's almost my lungs switched on by themselves. And I was breathless. And I looked in the mirror, and I was grey, and I was blue. And I could hardly walk. My legs felt shaky and I felt awful. So I just said to my wife, you need to take us to A&E. I'm in deep trouble here. And my wife recognised somebody who was ill, being an A&E nurse. So she ran called an ambulance. We were 3 minutes away from A&E. She took us. And I remember vividly, thought I was going to die there and then. I didn't know if I was actually going to make it to the hospital. And I had a secret prayer, if I'm to die now, please make sure at least we'll get the hospital so there'll be somebody to look after Melanie. And as it happens, they just didn't even bother clogging us. I just went straight through into resuscitation and was treated very promptly. So that was the run of the event. So no history of, apart from long haul flight 15 months beforehand, of being at risk. So I'm not going to go through all these issues in depth, but I just want to give you a flavour of the last 10 years at a glance. And I'm going to refer to the left-hand side there. So previously good health, unprovoked bilateral P, big clot burden, no DVT spotted at all with scans, age 49, can I say there's been a family history of anticoagulation, and two of my relatives, their use of anticoagulation was implicated in their deaths. Now, I know it's a horrible way to start, but the reason I mentioned that is I already had a picture of what anticoagulation could be implicated in. I'd also seen my father-in-law have a massive pulmonary embolism. So irrespective if you've got a background in it, I had an image, I had some pictures in my mind. I'm constantly on warfarin and have been since the beginning when I was diagnosed with a PE. And you can see here just a list of events. And that first grid at the top really shows that my progress was incredibly slow. And I was in hospital 3 times over a 6-week period, and I wasn't getting any better at all. And my first admission was for 7 days. They contemplated taking me into ITU, as I was confused and my blood gases weren't good. They were contemplating thrombolizing me to thin my blood very, very quickly, but they were sitting on the fence with regard to that. So basically I got home after 7 days. I was extremely ill, and I couldn't even walk up the stairs to get to bed. It was absolutely horrible. So these subsequent admissions highlighted the fact that my heart was extremely irritable, starting to enlarge with a degree of heart failure. So things weren't going smoothly. To top things all, they discovered that a part of my lung had actually, the diaphragm wasn't working properly. So I had 2 problems there with regard to the lungs, the P's and the paralyzed diaphragm. I was so breathless that I couldn't hold a conversation on the phone and had speech therapy for 4 months afterwards. I started on CPAP, and for those who are not familiar with CPAP, that's my mask, my best friend. It helped things turn the corner, and the reason I was put on CPAP was not because of sleep apnea, was because my oxygen levels were going low overnight. So the good story short, referred to pulmonary hypertension service, went through a whole batch of investigations, and they cleared me as not having chronic clots in the lungs, but indicated that was clear long-term difficulties with the ability of me to transfer oxygen from my lungs into the blood. So life was a bit of a mess, and I kept a diary, and I'm not going to go into the steps. I don't think you'll be able to say everything, but one of the challenges I had was, I guess, helping people and helping the medics in particular understand that things weren't right. So I kept a diary and logged when I had different symptoms, and that was really helpful, and it was helpful to them and well received. And I wrote in my diary, I just was looking over the diary the other day, and in March the 5th, that's 9 months post-PE, I think I realised that this breathlessness and fatigue is terrible and it's not likely to get better. I think I may have reached a plateau in terms of physical capabilities. Let's wait and see though. So I kept a diary, not because to immerse myself in the experience, but also to help the medical staff and the team looking after me go on. Just moving on briefly, just to say that I had abdominal surgery and bridging with tins of power on 2 occasions. That was scary. First time having an anaesthetic after having a PE is not the most relaxing experience. I was also hospitalised for 5 days after a massive nosebleed. And these are just some of the other headlights. From time to time, I get fed up with anticoagulation. Christmas in 2018 was a nightmare. No staff around. Christmas Eve, bleeding. Shall I go to casualty? Shall I not? So difficult times. I've had reviews. Stay on warfarin for life. DOACs are not suitable for you. And I had a suspected DVT, which was clear in 2020. So that in a nutshell is, I guess, the highlights of the journey. But in summary, I would say it's a long tail recovery. I know we use that term in relationship to COVID, but it resonates with me as someone who's had a VTE experience, that a lot of us have hidden long tail recoveries. The first 3 years were extremely hard, and to the extent I decided in year 3 to retire. Now that was a bold decision, had big implications. We also downsized our house. So basically it was a life changer. And then I would say from year 5 onwards, there's been some brilliant days, absolutely brilliant. And if I was to show you my diary for 2000 and 2018, 19, I have bad days, but the good days way outnumber the bad days. And I guess as part of that journey, I used to read 1 or 2 papers, and I found this interesting one by Susan Kahn in 2016 that really shows us that people like you and me may have long-term limitations and a negative impact on their quality of life as a result of pulmonary embolism. So there's some research now starting to indicate that we're trying to appreciate what patients like me and you experience. So what was that, the physical symptoms? What problems did I have? Well, as I mentioned before, it was horrible, the actual experience when the P started. And this feeling I cannot breathe. I was tipping into respiratory failure. I was very confused. Actually, I didn't realize this. The first afternoon in hospital was a blur. In fact, apparently I told my wife I'd be back home at tea time. I didn't realize the ICU staff had been up to see us. I remember my daughter coming, but my eyesight was blurred around the edges and I had waves of nausea. I could only walk 10, 15 steps. I had massive sleep problems. And I remember after the first day, I woke up and thought, well, I'm alive. And the nurse gave us a bowl and said, you wash yourself. And I obeyed, but basically collapsed in a heap when I tried. I just wasn't in the state to do anything. So I had a lot of debilitating fatigue. Years 1 and 3, the fatigue was still a big problem. And I think that's why I was referred to the pulmonary hypertension service. With sleep problems, breathlessness still, anxiety, loss of confidence. So there was a lot going on. And this sensation, I don't know if anybody else has experienced, that you felt you're breathing through a straw. And it would last for about an hour, and it's quite scary. And it would ease off. And then what am I left with now? Fatigue, breathlessness, sleep problems, and nuisance nosebleeds, which are due to a combination of anticoagulation, the CPAP, and a few other factors. So not everybody gets this, but I know from the sleep clinic, even if you're not on warfarin, you are prone to nosebleeds. So that's part of the package, but the fatigue is better now in the sense that I know to handle it and I understand what can prevent it. I'd like to say this time, thanks to the staff who cared for me, there's a lot of staff involved in my care. I'm not going to go through all of them, but if I was to say turning points, people that made a real difference, I'm going to say it's the pulmonary hypertension consultant and also the respiratory consultant who cared for me initially. They saw me very, very swiftly and recognized what was happening very swiftly. And I know that is not everybody's experience. And I'm led to believe another hour, I wouldn't be here to tell the tale, apparently. Oh, that's what was shared with us. So I am grateful for prompt assistance and also discernment in terms of what my needs were. I'd also like to thank the sleep medicine team, because once CPAP started, it actually started improving some of the symptoms. And also the token therapies, which I found on the internet, by the way. I just did a search, token therapy, psychological support, NHS. And one of the things is I wanted to know what was anxiety and what was caused by the pulmonary embolism. So I need to sort that in my mind. And they took me through mindfulness. And can I say that 9 years later, I still use those techniques. I feel I've got a toolkit I can refer to at different points. I think also the exercise referral. The reason I'm under an ENT consultant now is that I've got a lesion in a difficult place in one of my salivary glands, which is inoperable. And it's inoperable for 2 reasons. I wouldn't be good for surgery because of my history. And secondly, it's not in a good place. So I'm scanned constantly just to make sure it's not misbehaving itself. It's sitting there nicely, not growing, and long may it continue. And my care was provided across 3 NHS trusts. So moving on to the psychological recovery side of things, I don't know about anybody else, but images sometimes portray something more than words, and I find it difficult to describe the experience of VTE, but these images might give you a flavour of what was happening inside. That car with the engine ripped out was exactly how I felt at diagnosis. I felt the engine had been taken out. And as you look at that picture at the top about the climber going across the crevasse, I felt that's what life was like. It was every small step, and I had a fear of falling down some kind of crevasse. And I felt that I was still at risk for a number of years of actually dying prematurely. The picture at the bottom on the river represents, I don't know what's around the corner. And I had no sense of future. My sense of future had changed around, I hope I can get through the next week. I hope I can get through the next hour. I hope I get through the next day. And the iceberg was, everybody was telling us, you're looking great, Shaun. And I actually wrote that in my diary. As I said, very tired again today. The fatigue is awful, but you look fine from the outside, and everybody tells me you're doing great. But underneath, psychologically, you're falling to bits. And finally, the snakes and ladders. I was playing with my grandchildren, snakes and ladders, actually a number of years ago. And just that picture tells everything, that recovery from VTE, you can actually hit the ladder and go up halfway up the board. But a few rolls of dice later, you hit the snake and you're back down the bottom again. And that epitomised not only the physical recovery, but also the psychological recovery. I'm not going to go through this point by point or blow by blow, but you'll see there's a transformation from days 1 to 7 to now. In terms of days 1 to 7, I had a lot of fears and concerns, and it was chronic anxiety that was starting to build up. I was in total shock. How could it happen to me? I didn't have the risk factors. I did all the exercise I should. I keep yourself on the move. It shouldn't happen to people like me. And for a long time, I actually denied that it happened. And it was a strange sort of situation. And very frightened about being on my own first time in a house. And that lasted for about 3 to 4 months. And will it happen again? And then moving to now, I guess this sense of future has resumed. I occasionally get periods of loss of confidence, and I think it's bound to stay frightened in case anything does happen. I can tolerate uncertainty a lot better. In fact, actually, I think one of the gifts that's come is that in this current climate of uncertainty, because I was so unwell for so long, a lockdown hasn't been too much of a challenge. And I recognise that's not everybody's experience. I have tremendous times where I feel really peaceful. I have fed up times like everybody else, a sense of gratitude, want to give something back, and a stronger focus on the things that are important. And one of the underlying messages as well is that I've been able to do a lot more than I thought. I can't tell you what I thought inside I wouldn't be able to do, but I actually realised I was inhibiting my own progress or rehab. So there was, I guess, a number of touch points that were psychologically more challenging. Readmission to hospital, and when that third admission, where the doctor just gives me, GP just gives a letter and says, please admit for heart failure. It was shocking. I mean, it really took the wind out of my sails. That was an open letter. And I just went in there to ask for some advice. And I come out with a letter, go to hospital again. Touch points were, so no, I end a recovery journey, and when will I feel better? And when I had my first appointment, the consultant shared with us, your scan results are the type of results we'd see from somebody who would have an autopsy from. And that, the penny dropped then. Being alone, as I mentioned before, the pulmonary hypertension specialist thought at one point that I might have chronic clots that might need extensive surgery. But the test showed that I had a permanent reduction in lung capacity of 30% and 40% when I lie down. But generally, they were happy there was not going to be some permanent clots causing problems. Some of the investigations are scary. And I'm going to just make one point about the 100% oxygen challenge test. It was tough, but it was also good. And that was basically, they were trying to decide how much of my oxygen was getting from my lungs into my blood. So I sat in front of this great big bag of oxygen with a mask on, and it was all sealed. And basically, they took my blood gases. And that was 3 years post-PE. And I started to cry. And after about 4 or 5 minutes, and the tears were just rolling down my cheek, and they thought they were doing something wrong. And it was, in fact, actually the pleasure of having a clear brain. And I felt this fog go. And I remember what it was like to think clearly again. So that was I guess, a two-sided coin, but it was, I realized what I was missing, but I'd realized how far I'd come along. So other experience, like having to retire early in surgery, they were psychologically stressful times. And so what helped? I think, first of all, I felt quite alone, and I had to suss a lot of it out myself, because in terms of the professionals, some of them identified I was anxious, but nothing was offered. And after the first year, I thought, I've got to do something about this. So I put on a cork notice board in the room I used to work as an office. When things get tough, remember, Shaun. And I put that list there. And so when things are tough, I just look at that, and it would give us some encouragement to keep going on. The talking therapies and anxiety management were an absolute lifesaver psychologically. And also keeping a diary, not necessarily just to record what was going wrong, but to record what was going right. And realize that you can have good days and good spells. 10 years ago, social media was in a different place. But I did find a number of sites, and it was actually the Lifeblood site, Joe, that was going back some time, which is now obviously Thrombosis UK. I refer to that quite often, just to understand what clots were about. And also the Facebook running after a pulmonary embolism, which was wild. I thought, what am I looking at this for? I can't run. And also I had to learn to accept a new normal. And it took me a number of years to recognize this was the new normal. They've told you that things are not going to improve with your lungs. So let's see what you can do with what you've got. And the exercise definitely helped. And I started an exercise rehab program in 2014. And one of the ironies, I had one of my mother's friends next to me who'd had 3 heart attacks. And she was actually knocking spots off me on the treadmill. So it was, at first, it was quite disconcerting having to start from scratch. But by the end of the year, I did my first 5K park run. So there were lots of things going on. My mind plays tricks with me at times. You get 1 or 2 symptoms that appear for no reason. And sometimes you've got to do self-talk or think, do I need to see a specialist? And just finally, in terms of what helped, was reading the article by Simon Noble, Ray Lewis, Jodie Withers, Sarah Lewis, and Paul Bennett about long-term psychological causes of symptomatic pulmonary embolism. In one article, they summarized exactly how I felt inside, and no longer did I feel alone. So perhaps this might be an ideal time, Joe, just to pick up 1 or 2 questions that have come up so far.
Yeah, certainly. Something that's come to light for me, in the beginning of your presentation, you said the diagnosis came out of the blue. And we often hear, and somebody has already written in and shared this question, that she recently suffered a massive saddle PE. And she's at home now, but feels cut loose without any direction about advice or resources. And it mirrors what we hear from lots of people and some of the things you've shared as well. I'm wondering, how did you begin that journey of sourcing information and having that relationship, building that relationship up with your medical team?
That's an excellent question, and thanks to the person who submitted to that. I think, first of all, I went into denial. I knew what a pulmonary embolism was, and I'd seen people who are very ill. So I think it took me a long time to actually start the websites and literature. I guess my priority at the time was just surviving. That's where my emotive thinking come, and actually being driven to get better. But in that process, I missed a trick in trying to understand some of the problems. So the issue is I never asked those questions of the healthcare professionals. And looking back, I was hypoxic, I had low oxygen for a while, and I don't think I was myself. So in terms of, the usual thing of asking questions straight away, that didn't come in because I just didn't feel well enough to ask those questions. So I think it was my first consultation that I actually, in the October, my follow-up for my last admission October, where I started to ask the questions. And to be honest, I didn't get many answers. What the answers I got was was life-threatening. This was very difficult. But I got no sense of what the future might hold and what I could do. So I think I'll come on to that a bit more when I talk about making more of the consultations. And I guess that's been the driver, Joe, is actually making the most out of consultations. But after that, I certainly asked hard questions when I started to move to the phase after year one. But I did look at websites, but I looked at the wrong websites at first. And it was basically websites where people were on warfarin and had pulmonary embolisms who were seriously ill, but they just didn't seem to fit with my situation. So I drifted away from those sort of forums, to be honest.
I've got another question that we've received as well that it is in some ways linked and to something you mentioned as well earlier in your talk about struggling to understand what to expect when perhaps the pain might decrease or what is normal. And again, it was, what were the triggers that helped you to start looking at the positive? Because I mean, what you went through, I'm in awe of, but also I'm in awe because I can hear how you actually began to find the positive in this. What were those things that might help others to look at turning it to a positive of what can I do? How did you start that process? Because that was massive.
Well, that's an interesting one. In terms of the mindset I adopted, was after day 7, actually day 6, I decided to rehabilitate myself and start walking, and thought I can rehabilitate myself out of this, if you know what I mean, because I'm going home. So the incentive to get home sparked me into action. And the second area, as I mentioned before, in terms of that list I had on the wall, was one of the things that I put on that list. I've still got it somewhere on the computer, is be grateful for something today. And that really helped. And I think that actually, even though there was difficult symptoms, it was challenging. And the third area of main help was mindfulness. I recognized I could have spells without anxiety, and I'd get periods where everything seemed calm, and I just accepted them for what they are. But it also gives us the insights about being more grateful for what I've got, and also make sure that I don't put too many boundaries on myself. Allow yourself to recover. That journal entry is quite interesting. 9 months after a PE is I saw no recovery. So it's about actually allowing myself to try something. And what I did was, Melanie didn't know this, is after my recovery, about 6 to 9 months in the rehab program, which my GP fixed up, actually said, I'm just going out for a walk. She says, you've got your running shoes on and my shorts. And I said, well, I'm just going for a walk though, don't worry, Melanie. Well, what she didn't know is I'd run 3 miles. And so I tried things out. And to be honest, I let my body tell us, I allowed my body for the first time. I just did what my body allowed us to do. And actually, it's handing that trust over. If you're feeling rotten, don't do it. If you're feeling good, do it. And sometimes you find incrementally you get back on. And also running in a pulmonary embolism sowed, that Facebook site sowed a seed. Maybe I can do this again.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Shaun. Can I just remind everybody, if you have a question, please do feel free. I can see questions come in and asking about the theme of being alone. And I think lots of people do recognise this. There are many specialists, lungs, heart, etc. But this person's experience is, if you fall outside the specialism, especially with GPs, there's little understanding. Has this changed for you recently?
It has. I changed my GP. Yeah, I changed my GP because I think my first GP, when I'd go, didn't have any answers at all. And he says, you'll just get better. Just be patient. And I changed GP. And can I say that changed things? Is number one, we've got a practice where there's 10 GPs. And I can say with confidence that each of those GPs listen. And they'll give me 2 minutes just to tell us, or 3 minutes at the beginning, what I think's happening. And they're full of empathy. And they'll wait up and they'll say, this is what I think might be happening, but let's get things checked out. So I have the confidence now at the primary care level, because that's where I'm primarily cared for, bar these 2 consultants, is my GPs. I cannot thank them enough. They are fantastic. And that recent incident where shall I not go and get this checked out was because I had leg swelling on the right hand side and pit and edema in the foot, and I had itchiness and I could see the vessels were dilated, and I thought, shall I not? But my GPs made it easier. I went to GPs at 10 o'clock, I was scanned and a D-dimer I'd done all by 12 o'clock that day. And that sort of support makes it easy for us to walk through the door.
That is so empowering, thank you. Shaun, somebody has submitted a question about running safely. Can I just answer? The person's called Peter. Can I just answer, Peter? Shaun is slightly, but I'm definitely not medically trained. But what I will do with questions like that, tomorrow morning we have a thrombosis question and answer session. I will submit your question there and hopefully be able to come back to you with the answer, or if you're joining, you'll be able to hear then, if that's okay.
Can I just mention one point about that? In terms of my exercise program was facilitated at the GP, and my observations and saturations were checked at different points, and therefore I felt safe. That was and also I got sign off from the pulmonary hypertension specialist to resume exercise.
Somebody's raised a question, and it does mirror something you said, that when you went in on your first diagnosis, you were told that another few hours and it could have been a very different outcome.
Yeah.
And sometimes people in those situations say, you're lucky, and they mean well by it, but it can be very, very difficult to come to terms with that when you've gone through such a difficult experience and such a frightening experience out of the blue. What did you find? Were there any things that you found that helped you overcome that comment and actually cope with yourself and your family? Because it is a difficult thing to overcome, isn't it, when people are saying, well, you were lucky, but actually you don't feel lucky, you feel scared.
Absolutely. And it did nothing for us. I knew how ill I'd been because I had colleagues who worked in the hospital who had shared with us their concern, but the penny didn't drop fully. I felt so well, but actually that consultation where that news was shared with us was a catalyst to say, I need help here. I can't do it alone. And that's why I referred myself to organ therapies, just to make sense of that news. And so I wouldn't be embittered by it. That actually was helpful. I needed to do something about it because genuinely I didn't know the difference between what that anxiety was doing to my symptoms or what wasn't. But that news was terrible. And my wife and I just looked at each other and we thought, what happened there? Because I was just going there for a checkup. I was just going for it. I didn't expect to hear that, or I didn't expect to see the pictures of the scans and finger pointing about where all the clots had been and what they blocked and what they didn't block. And it was a shock because it came out the blue. If I'd expected some bad news, maybe I could have prepared for it. But it was just straight between the eyes and it left us floundering.
Thank you so much. I'll let you carry on now, but thank you.
Okay, can I say a big thanks for your questions? I hope these responses make sense and resonate with your quest forward. I guess in terms of the bits and bobs, they won't last as long as the first section, so hopefully we'll be able to move through them in about 10, 12 minutes or so, and then we'll obviously have time for more questions and comments. As I mentioned before, I asked my wife, what was it like watching this all? And I was curious about how she saw it. Now, she's an A&E nurse, and she's been involved in caring for people like me and you, coming through, you know, with calf pain or chest pain and breathlessness, etc. So she wasn't a stranger to this sort of scenario. But one of the things she was shocked is that both of us didn't recognize that it was a PE, even though she's seen that. And she said it was an incredibly scary thing to watch, and thought, will he survive? So that was all the thoughts going through her mind. And secondly, she said that everything is different now. Life is turned upside down. Nothing will be ever the same again. And that's something we shared, if you know what I mean. And that was her perception of things, because basically I couldn't work for 6 months. It took me a total of, I had to leave my job and take on a lesser role, which, can I say, I needed to do and I wanted to do. It took me a year and a half to get to work in 16 hours a week. And so it was a long haul out with medical appointments. And what was helpful to her was actually going to the medical appointments with me for the first 3 years. And can I say, this is really sad, but I actually had over 350 appointments in the first 4 years. I sat and counted, I must have had nothing to do. But she came with us, and purely so that she could understand what had happened and help me manage my expectations. And that actually, you can see some of their comments then, you can see where Melanie's starting to have a positive impact on what I did. And I'm really grateful for her, because she coached me quite a bit. She wasn't prepared for how tired and unwell I'd be for such a long time, because she didn't see it in A&E, the recovery journey. She saw that people were ill and needed help initially. And she was struggling at times to get the right balance between overprotective and encourage me to move on and give it a go. And she's got that balance really well now. I now go stand-up paddleboarding, and I'll be 200 yards, 300 yards off the northeast coast with a life jacket on and communication devices. And she doesn't come down with us. She just asks us where I'm going and when I'm likely to be back. And as long as you're there, where the lifeguards are there. But she's really allowed me to flourish again. She also prompted me, ask for help. Is it not time to have some help, someone help you with your anxiety? Or do you need to get checked out? So asking us the right questions. And sometimes you'll be downright clear. Shaun, pace yourself. You've just done too much today. I don't want the grass cut today. I'd prefer it if you could just sit back and rest. And at the end, she said, I never thought that life would be this good again. So in some respects, she shadowed a very similar journey to me in terms of cause for optimism. So I'm really grateful for her help and support. As I mentioned before, in terms of making the most of consultations with healthcare professionals, can I say I have some empathy and understanding. I'm a registered nurse by background, so I have worked in clinics before, so I've seen behind the scenes. But I realised that I guess different staff have different agendas and different ways of working. And so what I'd do is I'd say to myself, how can I make the most of the time I have with this healthcare professional on Thursday? And that's why I started keeping a diary, because I wanted to make it easier for them to help me. And so I'd start with, I just like, you know, I've made a few notes. I give them a sheet of paper with a few notes. And actually, I was surprised. I thought, hey, they're not annoyed with us. They're quite happy about it. And actually, they put them in my notes and they refer to them at different points in the consultation. So I also give myself the permission to ask stupid questions, and made sure that I was quite happy to ask them. And I also thought about what's keeping me awake at night and what are my biggest concerns and what do I need help with and what do I need to understand. So it was preparing for a consultation and not just walking out and think, well, I'll wait to see what the doctor's got to say, or the specialist nurse or the speech therapist. I'd go in there prepared. And I found that the consultations improved because of that action. And I had a few questions in mind, you know, particularly after year 2 and 3, I just got a bit more confident. is, can you explain what and why? I've got some questions. What can I expect in terms of recovery? And what do I need to look out for? What can I do to help make things easier in that recovery journey? And having someone with you in the early stages of the appointments is helpful, because sometimes I quite frankly couldn't remember what they said. And sometimes it didn't come up in the follow-up letter. So writing down who to contact if I've got any problems, they were all issues. But in terms of consultations, they improved with time. And I realized it was because I was able to, if I wanted to, ask those questions. Now let's talk a bit about anticoagulation, a change in tack here. I hope nobody's had their lunch or a late supper, or that picture of me in hospital. That was something that came from the side. It was a massive nosebleed. We were just about to go on holiday to celebrate recovery to Guernsey, and basically had some nuisance nosebleeds. So I thought, Melanie, I've got to get this sorted out. I checked out there's no ENT units on Guernsey. So I went and got my nose cauterized. 6 hours later, basically a massive bleed. I was in for 5 days, and it was discovered it was a combination of my CPAP, not having humidification, and my INR was very high. So it does happen. It hasn't happened since. I get nuisance nosebleeds. I got past that. But I then learned that from first-hand experience, anticoagulation has its risks. And perhaps some of you understand that greater than I in terms of your own experience. When I was first diagnosed, the constant message I got from every healthcare professionals is, you can't take this when you're on warfarin. You do realise that warfarin's a dangerous drug. And I was frightened in the same way that the consultant was saying, you know, this is a life-threatening diagnosis. Had the pharmacists saying to us, you do realise this is a dangerous drug. So no wonder I was anxious. And I was very frightened of it initially. I also found quite interesting, because I was cared for across 3 trusts, even though there's protocols or pathways they follow, when I was having surgery, actually the surgeons didn't agree on what to do with me. And I had to negotiate that. And also the pharmacists didn't agree with the pharmacists. Now that's going back 4 or 5 years, and things have maybe moved on. And I was at the end of, in our trust, we don't do it that way. And that didn't necessarily instill confidence. I've put COVID-19 anticoagulation. Things have changed for me. As I say, I've been trying to go down the DOAC route, but it's been deemed by, you know, 4 healthcare professionals, specialists and hematologists, stay on warfarin because you haven't clotted again. And we're quite happy for you. And this is my INR picture. During COVID, stabilized. And I've figured out why. It's consistent pattern of exercise, consistent lifestyle, consistent diet. It's better on the lower side. They're about to up it again. But actually, I've had my best INR readings during this COVID season, which is absolutely strange. And I've had gaps of 12 weeks between readings. I'm trying to get self-testing. I'm jealous of anybody who's got a machine, but Joe and the team are trying to help us in that process of getting self-testing sorted out, and my GP is assisting that process. The bumps in the road as well, at first, I was really scared when I went high, and I was really scared when I went low, and particularly around times when I'm having surgery. And so then I drew upon, you know, I guess some of the things I taught in mindfulness and by the psychological services. I drew from that toolkit to help me manage those situations. So I guess moving towards the end, I guess, of my bit of the session today is, as I mentioned before, during COVID, I sought help because I had leg swelling, pain and low INR. And to be honest, I probably left it a few more days than I should. It was clear the results were good with scans, but I realized with COVID, I was reluctant to go into hospital. And I'd say to anybody, please do it. If you've got any doubt about something that's not right, please go back and get the right assistance, because that assistance is still there, and I hope will be there throughout the coming months. I didn't find it easy when they suddenly switched me on to the 12-week gap for INR testing, as recommended by the NICE guidance for COVID. The longest I'd ever went was 7 weeks. So you can imagine that not knowing what your INR was a bit daunting, and it did bring some anxiety back. But that's been, I think, anxiety that everybody's got at the moment. I've also made sure that I keep moving more. I just make sure how many steps I do in the course of the day. I'm also exercising 4 or 5 times a week. I used to go to the gym. I've stopped going to the gym, but I've enjoyed the pleasures of walking and running. And also Leslie Samsung. This is not an advert for the Leslie Samsung routine, but I walk indoors when it's horrible weather outside. And also making time to look after my emotional well-being and a sharper focus on safety and well-being. So I guess in summary, moving towards the end, what has helped? I think first of all, when things get tough, that list I was mentioning about before, also understand what's happened to me. I got a copy of my medical notes 5 years after the diagnosis, and I went through it, and it helped me make sense of what had happened. Not because I was disappointed, but I saw exactly what had happened, and it made sense. Also, I think was actually seeking out people that filled us. That there's, again, new friends who I found that were very supportive and helpful, and also helping others understand the situation I was in. Also putting an emphasis on reducing the risks of happening again, and make sure that whatever information I've got fit to my circumstances, and being selective about what resources I would look at in social media, etc. And in terms of, I realized that I had a role to play in helping my recovery. And sometimes I had to push to get further investigations and help. And that wasn't easy to ask those things, but generally I found that I got a helpful response. And anticoagulation, getting fitter, still are active issues. So looking back, I'm not going to actually go through all these. I'll just leave this slide up for a moment or two before I put my concluding slide up, and you just have a look at, I guess, some of the points that summarize, I guess, the key elements of that journey at different phases.
Shaun, while people are reading that, can I ask a question that has come up and also had been shared with us pre your talk? You mentioned in it, you were very fortunate, your wife was able to go with you throughout the first 3 years to all the appointments, but you also, have a large family who must have been so worried as well. It can be very difficult sharing information with family throughout that time, getting them to understand, but also at a time when you don't always understand or have the answers you always want. Yeah. And when people are struggling, what did you find helpful to bring your family on board so you worked together and could understand together?
Right. The first thing is that I gave them space. I think the diagnosis, I basically left up to Melanie, and she shared what she did. I wasn't in a position to share it really. It was actually Father's Day. I was admitted a few days before Father's Day, and I would just be Dad. That's what I decided to be. But there were other consultations where there was suspected that I had chronic clots and that I may need to be referred to Cambridge for surgery. I went out of that consultation, and we both just cried walking down the street. And we decided the first thing to do was we've got to get our heads around this first. And I went back home, and our daughter came at the room, and she hesitantly come and she says, "Everything all right?" And I just said to her, basically, that the doctors want to really look more closely at what's going on and why I'm not recovering the way I am. And I basically didn't give her what I'd been told. So I just give her a hint that things weren't right. And I give her a hint that they wanted to look more closely. And I've also told I'll let you know. I says, but let you know your dad's okay at the moment. I'm not any different than I was yesterday, but that they're concerned that I'm not recovering the way that I am. So that was the last what I call bad news consultation that I remember sharing, apart from the nose bleeding, I knew that I'd get through that. So it was about giving them a little gentle warning shot, but also reassuring them this is where I am and that I'll keep them in the loop, But I remember looking at my mother-in-law, she was probing us. And I just was polite and smiled, and that we dealt with as a couple together with the right support rather than burden our family with those heavy weights, as it were.
And I guess on the flip side, sometimes when you have a PE or a DVT, you're given an anticoagulant, which is a treatment to help prevent it growing, prevent it reoccurring at that time, and also, well, the body dissolves it. It's not really a treatment for your mind and your recovery elsewhere, is it? And others sometimes can think, well, you've got the drug. And I think perhaps this was raised in one of the questions. And it is perhaps sharing information. And I know the Thrombosis UK website has this about how a DVT or a PE can impact you physically with pain or fatigue, a complete change in pace. And that can be exacerbated as well by how it impacts you psychologically because of the shock or what could have happened. It doesn't matter how severe it was or wasn't, you know what could have happened. Mm-hmm. And being able to share sometimes some of that material, that written information, can be very valuable to family members who can't always come with you to consultations, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a wonderful summary you've offered there, Joe, and there's 2 points I take from it. First of all, DOACs and vitamin K antagonistics, heparin, are not anxiolytics. And you do, I love the way that you portrayed it there. And people think, well, if you get rid of the clots, you get rid of everything else. Well, the fact is, a clot is a threat to your life, and your body recognizes that as such, and it goes into autopilot. It starts releasing chemicals that tell you that things are not right. So that's the first thing. I think secondly, that point you make about the consultations and going to reputable source of information, and please use that word when you speak to your GPs. And I would certainly recommend going to the Thrombosis UK site or signposting relatives, but also sometimes your family members might not want to go with you. And we just looked at the best solution that worked for us. But I remember once being signposted by one healthcare professional who said, just type in pulmonary hypertension into Google. And basically I got read the Riot Act, you might be dead in 2 years. But the fact is it didn't fit with me, but I couldn't figure that out for myself. I need help from healthcare professionals and organisations such as Thrombosis UK to signpost to me to facts and issues that I need to consider and give me a sense of. But also, when we contribute to forums, let's be sensitive of how we can help each other, because I felt incredibly alone, and social media does help you realise you're not alone in that recovery journey.
I think, and you've just touched upon another thing which we have had lots of questions about before, and now several have come up, about being diagnosed during lockdown. And so the challenge sometimes obviously with seeking that diagnosis, but also with the follow-up appointments and feeling completely isolated, anxious and alone. I'm using the words actually, and they're the right words that somebody has said, because the consultations aren't available or in person as perhaps they were, and it's challenging for the healthcare professionals and for the individuals. Do you think, if you can go to, how would you deal with this at this time? Do you think first stop would be your GP, although that could also be a telephone conversation because they could signpost you somewhere? And then also alongside that, looking, and there are obviously more than Thrombosis UK, but there are some reputable sites. So I know we have our closed Facebook page, which is only for patients, and it's monitored to be a reassuring, informative area where you can chat and have that support without the fear-mongering, which can occur on some unregulated sites. What would your thoughts and advice be?
I would agree with you. Particularly if you've already had, a thrombotic event, depending on exactly what your presenting symptoms, but please go to your GP, or if necessary, A&E. Please, I cannot emphasize that enough. And one of the things I've seems to have noticed in some of the forums that are out there is actually everybody's getting round each other to say, go and get checked out. Those sort of comments are coming more prominent. And I think the third thing is that if you're really worried about going for consultations, ring up and ask, what are you doing to keep me safe? Is there an alternative here? And when I go to the INR clinic, I went to the INR clinic 2 weeks ago, and I felt I was on the set of some kind of movie. I expected Donald Trump or somebody to walk from the side. It was just surreal seeing everybody in all this dress. It was weird. And so actually, she was really good. She explained that since the last time we visited, that this is what they were doing to improve safety for people like you. And if you're worried, you ring up the clinic. They've actually changed my appointments because my wife is at risk, high risk for COVID. She's on immunosuppressants. So they give me the first appointment in the morning, and I'm in and out when I need to be. But in terms of consultations, ask, is there any other way in which we can talk? You know.
Fantastic, finding the solution, yeah, fantastic. Yeah. On a really positive note, I obviously will thank you later, but we've had some really lovely comments in from individuals listening today, thanking you and saying how helpful this is. And one in particular, I thought this is wonderful, said that he was diagnosed 6 weeks approximately ago and had thought, you know, it was at the point of whatever will improve. Referral for follow-up is possibly 18 weeks away. But listening to you, Shaun, he said, I was on the point of giving my paddleboard away, but we'll still keep hold of it now. So yeah. I'm sure thank you from many, many people. Shaun, I'll let you continue because I know you have another.
This is my last slide, is that I think that the way that you've rounded things up is beautiful, Joe, because can I tell you that life is different now. Life is a lot better. It's still in the background. It's still a game changer, VTE. It's still issues to manage. But there are three bits I'm proud of. I'll call the landmark events. Some of them are not on here. They're attending family weddings that I never thought I'd have the chance to. They're attending, being close to some of our newborn grandchildren. But this picture here of me and my son, who's now a pharmacist, but we have chats about anticoagulation quite a bit. He's trained to be a pharmacist, and I went up to one holiday, actually it was 5 years post-PE, and I thought, can I get to the top of Skiddaw? And actually just made the goal, and I went actually by myself at first. And I went up, and I tell you, walking up Carl's side, for anybody who's familiar with Skiddaw, it took me a long, long time, and I was breathlessness. But no longer was saying, I never want to be breathless again. This was normal breathlessness, a lot more breathless than I would have been. And I've always wanted to see from the top of the mountains. And I saw it that morning. And the next day, my son came up and the hairs were standing up the back of my neck. So those experiences I did before are even better now. And this is a picture of me and my two daughters. It was a race for Thrombosis UK 2 years ago, 10K. It's the longest I've ever run because I find that my heart rate does go up after an hour of exercise. Doesn't matter what pace I go, and I start to tire. But we ran together, and I'm pleased to say I beat all two of them. But it wasn't about the race. It was the pleasure of just being with friends again. And I've taken up paddleboarding 2 years ago. My son's fixed up with a wetsuit, etc. So things can and do get better. But there may be ups and downs to get there. And like most journeys, they don't always run to time or as you hoped. And certainly, I didn't expect it to be where I am now. So just to say a massive thank you for listening. And I hope there's something that you can take away from this session. And I'd certainly encourage you to go to Beverly's session tomorrow. I attended hers about 4 months ago. Absolutely brilliant. I've still got lots of questions. And sort of those sort of sessions with an expert like Beverly are well worth attending. So thank you. And thanks, Joe, for organising.
Thank you, Shaun, so much. Thank you to everybody who's joined, who shared questions as well, and also to the very, very kind comments which have come through for Shaun. Thank you. With Shaun's permission, and I'll talk with him after this, we will be sharing a recording of this on the website within a few days. And just thank you so much, Shaun, for shining a light, but shining a very real, a very sort of strong spotlight on what it's like, but also how you can travel along a journey to recovery. It isn't easy, but you've showed us that there are highs as well as challenges. And thank you so much for your positivity as well. I've learned loads.